Right, so last night we had the Sky News Party leader interviews, didn't we? And frankly, neither Sunak or Starmer did very well, did they? It was very much a case of coming away and thinking, I'm not voting for either one of these con artists. Frankly, in my view, they're one as bad as each other. They're both Tories. We should run a mile and definitely be taking our votes elsewhere. But the Starmer interview was notable because he really gave an insight, not only into the sort of person he is, by his reactions to the audience, the electorate effectively in this situation, but also insofar as what he said of the last general election campaign for Labour, what his actions were then versus his position now, and what he's done as leader of the Labour Party since. And in both of these matters, I believe he really did finally show us his true colours. Right, so Keir Starmer being interviewed by Beth Rigby on Sky last night did not have a fun time of it, really. Not that he deserved any. The audience were not going to put up with rote responses, the oft-repeated phrases, or any of that. Even down to one person calling him robotic, questioning him on his roboticness, to which he froze in response. A Maybot moment, perhaps.
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
Yeah, that Labour slogan of change. Nothing is going to change, is it really? Starmbot would be a bit of a rip-off name for him, though, wouldn't it? Perhaps Keirborg or Robo-Starmer might be a better fit. Keith Troik 2000. Now, that one actually sounds like it might be good at something. For me, though, there were two standout moments, and the first one relates to just how fed up with Starmer's responses to certain questions the public is. But also his reaction to that was also very telling.
When I grew up, my dad was a toolmaker. He worked in a factory. It's true. My mum was a nurse, and actually we couldn't make ends meet, which actually isn't a laughing matter. We couldn't make ends meet. We couldn't pay our bills.
There's a two-child benefit cap for families, some of whom have more children than that. This is hitting some of the poorest and most vulnerable in Britain.
Yeah.
The Resolution Foundation think tank says families cannot claim about £3,200 per extra child a year. Dozens of organisations, from the Trade Union Congress to the Church of England to the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, have called for it to go. Will you scrap it? Is that in your manifesto tomorrow?
No, it isn't.
So Starmer finally got the reaction to his "my dad was a toolmaker, my mum was a nurse" line that he deserved. People have caught on to the fact that there are so many phrases Starmer incessantly repeats, as if they are valid answers to a multitude of different questions that he gets asked. To sell these working-class credentials, for example, that he claims to have, despite it being rather difficult to imagine that growing up in the 60s and 70s as Starmer did, with both parents working at that time, that they couldn't make ends meet. That's the truth of today's families, both parents working and fully not making ends meet, reliant on queues to food banks, things that didn't actually exist in the 60s and 70s, and he knows that. He's playing on it. He tried it on when it came to Sky TV too, a line Sunak had come out with, but he didn't have Sky TV as a kid. In Sunak's case, he was 9 though when Sky came out in 1989. Lots of people didn't have it. We didn't either. I was 11 back then. It was considered a luxury. Lots of us didn't have that, but Starmer's saying it. He was 27 when Sky came out, a grown man. Starmer really didn't like being laughed at though. In fact, he snapped at the audience over it. But he also completely missed the point of why they were laughing at him. Interviews and speeches that Keir Starmer gives are becoming drinking games. My dad was a toolmaker. Shot. My mum was a nurse. Shot. I was director of public prosecutions. I ran a public service, the Crown Prosecution Service. Labour is a changed party under my leadership. My Labour. Labour has changed. My wife works in the NHS. You can get legless watching him give a speech or give an interview because he says the same things over and over again. Learnt rote responses because he is incapable of thinking on his feet, as happened when he got called robotic. That is why people are now laughing at you, Keith, because we're all sick of the same things being said that tell us very little and annoy us past the point of a facepalm now. But he actually had the brass neck to believe the audience were laughing at him talking about, allegedly, growing up in poverty, the son of a toolmaker, though the toolmaker in question allegedly owned the factory, and was incidentally a genuine supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, unlike his son, seemingly the biggest tool he ever made. Starmer was angered by the audience implying poverty was a laughing matter. Yet when it came to the two-child benefit cap being brought up, and whether doing away with that would appear in the Labour Party manifesto, being launched as I was writing this, he said no. So for all of his understanding of poverty that he claims, he's completely clueless as to the scale of it in this country in this day and age, where he certainly doesn't struggle, a millionaire today as he is, whether you choose to believe his story about poverty in his youth or not. The audience are far more in touch with living at the sharp end than this allegedly working class individual who, if ever that was true, long ago forgot his roots and his ambitions scream of wanting to mix with the rich and powerful, preferring Davos to Westminster as he does, rather than represent ordinary working class people he claims he's putting the party back in the service of. Jeremy Corbyn did that. He put Labour back in the service of ordinary people. Corbyn put transformative policies forward for change, and yet here's Starmer taking them all away, or having already taken them all away, having claimed to have stood for them and binned the lot. And given a modest wealth tax would pay to scrap this heinous two-child benefit policy cap that is keeping 250,000 kids in poverty, and he's deliberately choosing not to do that. His choice, his pretense at being on our side, is just another in a very long list of Starmer lies. But talking about Corbyn actually brings up the other major point, a revelation, in fact, about Starmer that was also mentioned.
Let's just go through that, because in the last two general elections, you asked people to elect Jeremy Corbyn as their Prime Minister. You said, I do think Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn, did you mean that?
I was certain that we would lose the 2019 election.
That wasn't my question.
I was certain that we would. I was certain that we would lose it. I did campaign for Labour, of course I did. I will openly say I campaigned for Labour. I wanted good colleagues to be returned into the Labour Party.
When you said it.
And I wanted a party that was capable of being changed so we could face the future again.
Did you not mean it when you said it?
I was certain that we would lose, and I think many other people were certain that we would lose.
So you didn't mean it?
I was certain that we would lose.
So you said it because you didn't think he would be Prime Minister anyway?
Of course I campaigned for the Labour Party at the last election and the election before that, the one before that. I've always campaigned for the Labour Party, and I'm glad I did, because I wanted good colleagues to be returned to have their seats so that we could fight for the future of the Labour Party.
Starmer claimed there that Labour were always going to lose the 2019 general election there. Over and over again he said it, in fact, to avoid answering the question he was actually asked as to whether he thought Corbyn would have made a good Prime Minister. A man Starmer suspended on spurious reasons, abusing his own executive powers to do, and forcing Corbyn in the end to go independent to continue standing up for the people of Islington North as he's done for the last 40-odd years. Well, Starmer put a private health CEO up for the seat against him now. Those working-class beliefs of Starmer shining through once more clearly. He admitted to campaigning to get good colleagues re-elected, so he said. And given the purges and the parachuting in of candidates he's been doing relentlessly now for months, it's safe to assume it was right-wingers he was looking to protect then, all whilst he was a member of Corbyn's shadow cabinet, let us not forget. Therefore, under collective responsibility, he would have signed off on the 2019 manifesto he said the party was going to lose on just there. And he would have shaped the policy of his brief, Starmer's contribution, easily being the lousiest part of what was a good set of policies that would have benefited ordinary working class people and made the rich pay their fair share instead of evading and avoiding it. Starmer's brief, of course, back then was Brexit. 2019 was the Brexit election. Get Brexit done. As Boris Johnson said, our deal is up and ready. And it was up against Starmer's ridiculous people's vote position that he'd put Labour in the year before. The Corbyn absolutely should have shut down and sacked Starmer from the front bench over, in my opinion, but that is now by the by. Well, Starmer said here, though, that despite his own contribution to that manifesto, that he knew Labour were going to lose that election, which is all he said, dodging the Corbyn support question, positioning himself just like the Tories in the belief that bashing Corbyn is now a vote-winning strategy. You see, before Starmer declared his belief that a second referendum on Brexit was needed, his so-called people's vote, with Remain being put back on the table, was announced. Corbyn's Labour had been leading in the polls for some time. Corbyn's fence-sitting strategy, as many called it, of letting the Tories destroy themselves over Brexit was working. His other policies, popular as they were, kept the Labour vote share up, until Starmer's widely regarded as an act of sabotage people's vote wrecked it. That is when Labour's polling slid. That is when many of us, as Corbyn supporters, wanting that change for the country, knew in our hearts it was over. Starmer effectively having called Labour out as a Remain party, whether we chose to admit it at the time or not. So Starmer saying he knew Labour would lose? Well, he also knows that that is as a direct result of his own actions at the time, and he as good as admitted it there. That his second vote on Brexit was a successful and deliberate act of sabotage to keep the Tories in power for another 5 years. It was certainly the impression I got upon hearing that myself. He knew what he did back then. He knew what it did with regards to Labour's polling, and we all know the result. The Starmer admitted the reason, in effect, we've had another 5 years of hardship and pain from the Tories is in no small part a direct result of his own personal actions under Corbyn as part of his shadow cabinet, which have forwarded his own ambitions, of course, getting him to the top of the Labour Party and now as good as measuring up those new curtains to hang in number 10 Downing Street. If he becomes PM, he'll have been rewarded, in effect, for having kept the Tories in power 5 years longer than they should have been. 5 years where we've seen them hand crony contracts out like water, blow millions in public money, mishandle a pandemic leading to tens of thousands of lost lives, many of which might have been avoided, and everything else we've observed that has happened to all of us in that time, as government policy touched all of our lives. Starmer played no small part, it seems, in delivering that. So are you really sure you want to reward this robotic liar and seemingly now self-admitting saboteur by voting for Labour? Something to think about, isn't it? Meanwhile, of course, Jeremy Corbyn is standing again for Islington North. He needs help to get re-elected, though, so many of his constituents still, of course, believe he's actually still in Labour, rather than running as an independent now. So word needs to get out in case people accidentally vote for the Labour candidate rather than independent Jez. It happens. People look for the party on the ballot more often than the name, because who knows who half the people on the ballot actually are a lot of the time. But you know who the parties are. If you can and do wish to help, you need the info in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.